You have been lied to. Your entire life. Every textbook, every guidebook, every tour guide in Istanbul has been lying to your face. They told you, Hagia Sophia is a great Christian temple, a masterpiece of Orthodoxy, the jewel of Byzantium. Then a mosque. Then a museum. Then a mosque again. A tidy, convenient, beautiful story. 4 names, 4 owners. End of story. Now forget all of that. Because in the next hour, you will learn something that will turn your understanding of the world upside down. Hagia Sophia is not a Christian temple. The columns inside come from the pagan Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The axis of the building does not point east as a church should. It points to the exact spot where the sun rises on the winter solstice. Like Stonehenge, like the pyramids. On the floor, 6th century mosaic swastikas. At the center, a pagan navel of the earth where emperors were crowned for 1,000 years. And on the walls, Viking runes that went unnoticed for 1,000 years. And that is only the beginning. You will learn who really built the first temple on this site and why the textbooks credit the wrong man. You will learn why the dome that millions admire is not Justinian's dome. The original collapsed after 21 years, and its description has been erased from history. You will learn who first plundered Hagia Sophia, and no, it was not Muslims. It was Christians, Crusaders. They seated a prostitute on the Patriarch's throne and drank wine from sacred chalices. Neither the Vatican nor Istanbul talks about this. You will learn why the mosque's mihrab points one way, while the building itself faces an entirely different direction, and why, in 1,500 years, not a single owner has managed to make Hagia Sophia submit. 4 million tourists a year enter this building. They all raise their heads, to the dome, to the mosaics, to the gold. Nobody looks down. But they should, because the greatest secret is underfoot, and today we are going to reveal it. This is not a tour. This is an investigation, layer by layer, fact by fact. From a pagan acropolis of the 7th century before our era to Erdoğan's decree in 2020. 1,500 years of substitutions, concealments and renamings. And a direct connection to Russian civilization that nobody will tell you about. Watch to the very end. Do not switch away. Here is what any tour guide in Istanbul will tell you. Hagia Sophia is a 6th century Byzantine Christian temple, later converted into a mosque, a masterpiece of Orthodox architecture, the symbol of Eastern Christianity, the crown jewel of the Justinianic age. It is a tidy, beautiful, convenient version of history. And it is a lie. Hagia Sophia is not a Christian temple built over a pagan foundation. It is a pagan structure with a Christian shell stretched over it. The columns are pagan. The name is pagan. The orientation of the building is pagan. The architects were not priests. They were a mathematician and a physicist working from pre-Christian treatises. The dome is not the one Justinian built, and the foundation sits on a hill that was sacred 1,000 years before Christ. Everything you see when you walk through those doors is 4 layers of camouflage draped over what was originally there. And that is exactly what we are about to prove, fact by fact, layer by layer. Start with the name. Hagia Sophia in Greek means holy wisdom. Every guidebook explains this. No guidebook says the following: Sophia is not the name of a saint. She is not a martyr, not an ascetic. It is an abstract concept of pre-Christian Greek philosophy. Sophia, wisdom, was a central category for Plato, for the Stoics, for the Neoplatonists. The cult of Sophia existed 500 years before the birth of Jesus. This relates to a direct borrowing. The Christians did not invent a new dedication for the chief temple of the empire. They took a pagan term and stuck the word holy in front of it. But even this name did not appear at first. The first temple on this site was consecrated on the 15th of February in the year 360. Its name, Megale Ecclesia, Great Church. No dedication, no doctrine, no saint's name, just big. Why? Because the hill already had a name. It had been sacred long before Constantius II brought his stonemasons. Ancient Byzantium, the city founded by Greek colonists in the 7th century before our era. The acropolis of Byzantium stood precisely here, on the hill where Hagia Sophia stands now. In the Greek world, an acropolis is not simply a fortress, it is a sacred center, the place where the temples of the chief gods of the polis are raised. In the case of Byzantium, Apollo, Artemis, Aphrodite. When Constantine the Great moved the capital here and renamed the city Constantinople, he was not building on empty ground. He was planting a cross, literally, on top of a pagan cult complex. This relates to a universal practice of the early church, not to destroy, but to absorb. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem stands on a shrine of Aphrodite. Old St. Peter's in Rome on an Etruscan necropolis beside a local god's temple. The Pantheon in Rome, a former temple of all gods turned into a church. Hagia Sophia is the exact same case, only nobody prints that on the entrance ticket. Now, the columns. Walk inside, raise your eyes. 140 monolithic columns support the vaults. The guide will say, Byzantine work, 6th century. The guide is lying. 8 green marble columns were brought from the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. A temple burned by Herostratus in 356 before our era. A temple worshipped for 1,000 years before Christ. Its remnants are here, inside the walls of this Christian cathedral. This relates to a concrete, physical fact. The supporting bones of Hagia Sophia are the bones of a pagan goddess. It goes further. 8 red porphyry columns were brought from Heliopolis, the Temple of the Sun in Egypt. Porphyry, a stone quarried in only one place on earth, at Mons Porphyrites. By the 5th century, the quarry was closed. No new porphyry could be had. This means the columns of Hagia Sophia were torn from functioning or recently shuttered Egyptian sanctuaries. Additional materials from Baalbek in Lebanon, from Pergamon in Asia Minor, marble from France. Every stone is a trophy from a conquered pagan world. In the narthex of the temple, there still stands an altar of red porphyry. Simple, roughly carved. It is a pagan incense burner. It has stood at the entrance to the greatest temple of Eastern Christianity for 1,500 years, and no one has removed it. Now, orientation. This may be the most powerful argument of all. Hagia Sophia is not aligned due east, as a Christian church should be. It is turned 33.5 degrees south of east. This is the precise direction of sunrise on the winter solstice, the 21st of December. The longest night. The first ray of dawn enters through the window above the main door and cuts across the entire nave. Once a year, on exactly one date, Stonehenge is aligned to the solstice, the Great Pyramid of Giza to the solstice, the Temple of Amun at Karnak to the solstice, and the chief temple of the Byzantine Empire also to the solstice. This relates to a question that mainstream scholarship prefers not to ask. How did 2 Christian architects of the 6th century possess the astronomical calculations used by the priests of Heliopolis and the builders of megaliths? The answer exists. Anthemius of Tralles was not a priest. He was a professor of mathematics and geometry. Isidore of Miletus was not a monk. He was a physicist who published the collected works of Archimedes and wrote commentary on the treatises of Heron of Alexandria about vault construction. Both were scholars who worked with the ancient corpus of knowledge, not the Bible. with Archimedes, with Euclid, with Ptolemy. They were not building by divine revelation. They were building from pagan blueprints. And here comes the hardest blow. The dome. The very dome everyone comes to see. 55 meters high, 32 meters across. The Statue of Liberty fits beneath it with her pedestal. The guide says, Justinian's masterpiece. The guide is lying. Justinian's dome collapsed after 21 years. The earthquake of 558 brought it down completely. Descriptions of the original dome are lost. Procopius, Agathias, Paul the Silentiary, all saw the original, all wrote about it, but the form cannot be reconstructed. The shape and function of the original dome, in the wording of the Princeton study, were forgotten in the course of time. This relates to a fact no architectural historian disputes. The dome you see today is at minimum the third version. The reconstruction by Isidore the Younger, 562, partial collapses, 989 and 1346. The final reconstruction, Italian brothers Gaspare and Giuseppe Fossati, 1847 to 1849. The dome under which tourists stand today is the work of two 19th-century Italians. Not Justinian, not Anthemius, not Isidore. Substitution. So then, the name, pagan, the columns, pagan, the altar, pagan, the orientation, pagan, the architects, worked from pagan treatises. The dome, not the original, the foundation, sits on a pagan acropolis. And after all of this, we are told that Hagia Sophia is a Christian temple. This is not a Christian temple. It is a pagan construction that was renamed 6 times, repainted 4 times, and covered with a new dome 3 times over. Each new owner, Constantius, Justinian, the Crusaders, Mehmed, Ataturk, Erdoğan, changed the sign on the door. But the walls, the columns, the foundation, the axis of the building remained the same. Pagan. And to understand why and for whom this structure was originally raised, we need to descend 1,000 years deeper, below all 6 layers, below all 6 names, to a place where sacrificial fires to Apollo still burned on this hill, where the city was called neither Istanbul nor Constantinople, but Byzantium, and where no cross yet existed. 7th century before our era, Rome barely exists. Constantinople is not even a concept, and on this hill, sacrificial fires are already burning. A Greek colonist named Byzas, or Bisas, depending on the source, founds a settlement on the promontory between the Golden Horn and the Sea of Marmara. The city takes his name, Byzantium. And the first thing the colonists build is not a wall, not a port, not a marketplace. An acropolis, a sacred summit, the place where the altars of the chief gods of the polis are erected. Apollo, Artemis, Aphrodite, 3 deities on one hill, 3 cults at one point. This is not a random collection. Apollo, god of the sun and prophecy. Artemis, goddess of the moon and the hunt. Aphrodite, goddess of fertility and dominion over the living. Sun, moon, earth. A complete cosmological triad on a patch of ground the size of a football pitch. Greeks did not scatter their temples at random. They placed them where, in their conviction, the earth spoke to the sky. This hill spoke louder than most. This relates to a fact no archaeologist disputes. Hagia Sophia stands precisely on the site of the Acropolis of Byzantium. Not near it, not beside it, directly on it. The coordinates match. The 4th century foundation sits on the 7th century before our era foundation. This is not coincidence. This is seizure. Constantine the Great relocates the capital of the Roman Empire here in the year 330. He renames Byzantium as Constantinople. He declares himself the first Christian emperor. And here is the question no official historian answers. What did Constantine do with the sanctuaries on the Acropolis? Demolished them? No evidence of demolition. Dismantled them? No evidence of dismantling. Relocated them? There was nowhere to go. The entire city was being rebuilt simultaneously. The answer is simpler and more disturbing. He buried them. Foundations of new buildings were laid on top of old ones. Pagan altars were not dug out. They were sealed in mortar and walled over with stone. A standard method. This was done across the empire. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem over a shrine of Aphrodite. Old St. Peter's in Rome over an Etruscan necropolis. The Pantheon, a pagan temple reconsecrated as a church. Constantinople is not the exception, it is the rule. But rules are sometimes broken. In 2004, British archaeologist Ken Dark and Czech researcher Jan Kostanec begin a systematic survey of the area around Hagia Sophia. The work continues for 14 years, until 2018. Results are published in 2019 in the monograph Hagia Sophia in Context. And here is what they find. Fragments of 4th century buildings, the earliest phase of the cathedral, which no one had previously identified. A hypogeum, an underground chamber, to the north of the structure. A previously unknown baptistry, possibly the Great Baptistry, where the emperor's children were baptized. Remains of the patriarchal palace, from which the entire Orthodox Church was governed for 1,000 years. And, pay attention, an unrecognized porch, surviving to its full height within the standing building. This relates to an astonishing fact. Inside Hagia Sophia, there is an entire architectural element that has stood in plain sight for 1,500 years, and nobody noticed it. The floor plan of the most famous building on Earth turned out to be wrong. It had to be revised in the 21st century. Then, in 2026, new data emerges. Beneath the western and southern wings of Hagia Sophia, previously undocumented architectural remains are discovered. Researchers believe these belong either to the initial construction phases of the building or, and this is where it gets interesting, to an even earlier Roman period, not Byzantine, Roman, or possibly earlier still, pagan. The very Acropolis of Byzantium that we are told vanished long ago. It did not vanish, it is down there, directly beneath the marble floor that 4 million tourists walk across every year. And here is what is noteworthy. Excavations around Hagia Sophia were halted. The official reason: risk to the structural integrity of the building. Digging further is dangerous. It could damage the foundations of the Justinianic construction. Sounds reasonable, sounds responsible, sounds like perfect cover. Because precisely the same wording, risk to integrity, is used every time a shovel gets close to something inconvenient. Beneath the Western Wall in Jerusalem, no digging allowed. Beneath the pyramids of Giza, no digging allowed. Beneath Hagia Sophia, no digging allowed. 3 principal sacred sites of 3 civilizations, and at every single one, archaeologists are told to stop. Coincidence? 3 times in a row? Procopius of Caesarea, Justinian's personal historian, wrote an entire panegyric about Hagia Sophia. His book, On Buildings, praises the emperor and his temple. Procopius describes the light, the dome, the marble, the dimensions. But there is one thing Procopius does not mention, not once. Not a single word. What stood on this site before Hagia Sophia? Not the pagan temples, not the acropolis, not the sanctuaries. 0. A void. As though before Justinian there was nothing but bare rock. This relates to a standard technique of imperial propaganda. You do not refute the predecessor, you erase the predecessor. You do not argue, you pretend they never existed. The same Procopius also wrote The Secret History, a devastating text about Justinian and his wife Theodora. It contains everything: corruption, cruelty, licentiousness, executions. If Procopius had known about pagan temples on this site, he would have written about them. He detested Justinian enough to use any compromising material, but he did not write about it, which means he either did not know or knew and stayed silent. Both options are troubling. The first possibility means that by the 6th century, memory of the pagan acropolis had been completely obliterated. In 200 years, from the 4th century to the 6th, all information about what stood on this hill before Constantine was purged from every source. Professionally, totally, without a trace. The second possibility means that even Justinian's fiercest critic considered this subject so dangerous that he dared not touch it. In either case, we are dealing with a deliberate, organized concealment. Beneath Hagia Sophia lies a layer that appears on no official map. Archaeologists have confirmed its existence. The new finds of 2026 are clarifying its scale, but further digging is not permitted. Risk to integrity, a convenient formula, especially convenient for those who do not need to know what lies 7 meters below the altar. Because if beneath the altar of Istanbul's chief mosque there is a pagan sanctuary of Apollo, then the entire construct of sacred ground crumbles, for Muslims and Christians alike. And for the state that earns €25 per admission ticket on the strength of that sacredness. The hill is older than every god ever placed upon it. It is older than Apollo, because before the Greeks, Thracians lived here, and the Thracians had gods of their own. It is older than Christ, because the Acropolis of Byzantium stood 1,000 years before the Gospel. It is older than Muhammad, because the minarets appeared 2,000 years after the first altar. This hill accepted offerings from dozens of cults. Not one of them lasted forever. Not one became the last. Every new owner was certain he was the final one. Everyone was wrong, but one man did dare to build on this site something the world had never seen, something designed for eternity. He asked permission neither of gods nor of men, and he paid for it with 30,000 lives. The first lie starts in the school textbook. Open any of them: Russian, Turkish, European. Hagia Sophia was built by Constantine the Great. This is not true. Constantine the Great did not build Hagia Sophia. He did not even commission it. The first temple on this hill was consecrated on the 15th of February in the year 360, 23 years after Constantine had passed. The patron was his son, Constantius II, a man whom history remembers as a mediocrity. Not a great general, not a reformer. A bureaucrat on a throne, ruling in the shadow of his father's name. And it was precisely he, not his legendary father, who decided to drape a Christian basilica over the pagan acropolis. Why does this matter? Because the swap of authorship is not an accidental error. It is a deliberate operation. To credit the temple to Constantine is to lend it the weight of the empire's founder, the baptizer of Rome, the first Christian Caesar. To credit it to Constantius is to admit that the first Christian temple on this site was laid not by genius, but by an imitator. Not by grand design, but by inertia. The textbooks chose the beautiful version. Reality is different. What was this first church? A wooden basilica, a gabled roof of timber. The plan, modelled on old St. Peter's in Rome. The architect, Rufinus. Almost nothing is known about him. No other buildings, no school, no treatises. An invisible man who built the first temple on the most contested hill in the Mediterranean. This relates to a telling pattern. The more important the building, the less we know about those who actually built it. Justinian's Hagia Sophia was designed by a mathematician and a physicist. At least their names survive. The first church was designed by a ghost. The name of the first church, Megale Ecclesia, Great Church. No dedication to a saint, no attachment to a doctrine. No theological grounding, simply big. Not holy wisdom, not Christ the Saviour, not Mother of God, just big. As though the builders did not know to whom to dedicate it, or knew but dared not, because the hill was already dedicated, and not to Christ. The name Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom, would not appear for another 70 years, approximately by the year 430. For 70 years, the chief temple of the new Christian capital stood without a proper name. For 70 years, it was called simply the Big Church, the way you label a barn when you have not figured out what it is for. This relates to a critical detail. The temple existed before its ideology. First, the walls. Then, the explanation for why they stand. The building was searching for its own meaning, and found it only 2 generations later. A wooden roof. This fact is worth saying out loud and thinking about. The principal temple of the Eastern Roman Empire, the capital that claimed world dominion, was covered in wood. Not marble, not stone, not bronze. Wood. In a city where fires occurred with the regularity of seasonal rains, in a region where earthquakes are recorded every decade. Either Constantius lacked the funds, doubtful for an emperor commanding the treasury of half the known world, or he did not consider this building important enough for a stone dome. Or, and here is the most uncomfortable option, he himself understood that this was a temporary structure. A mask, a wooden mask on the stone face of a pagan hill. Something to cover the pre-Christian sanctuary while they worked out how to replace it for real. The mask lasted 44 years. In the year 404, Constantinople erupts in revolt. The cause? The exile of Patriarch John Chrysostom. The Archbishop of Constantinople, one of the greatest preachers in the history of Christianity, is banished on the orders of Emperor Arcadius. The faithful take to the streets. They demand the return of their pastor. They set the city on fire, and the first thing to burn is their own church. Megale Ecclesia, Great Church, the principal temple of Eastern Christendom, destroyed not by pagans, not by barbarians, not by Persians, by Christians, by the very people for whom it was built. The wooden roof ignites like a matchstick. By morning, ashes. Consider this, 44 years, and the congregation itself burns down the temple during an internal church conflict. Not enemies of the faith, defenders of the faith. People who believed they were protecting the truth destroyed the building that symbolized that truth. This is the first instance, but far from the last. Hagia Sophia will be burned, plundered, and demolished again and again. And every time, by the hands of those who swore to serve it. Theodosius II orders a new construction. The 10th of October in the year 415, the consecration of the second Hagia Sophia. A new basilica, a monumental entrance, marble columns, an architrave bearing reliefs. Among those reliefs, 12 lambs. 12 lambs symbolizing the 12 apostles of Christ. Carved muzzles, stone eyes, chipped hooves. Every detail, the handwork of 5th century masons. This relates to the only fragment of the second church that survived to the present day. Pieces of these reliefs were found by archaeologists in front of the western facade of the current building. The lambs were lying face down in the dirt, crushed, cracked, trampled by the feet of those who in January of 532 came here not to pray, but to burn. The second church stood for 117 years, longer than the first, but the end was the same: fire. January of 532, the Nika Revolt. A mob uniting the blue and green racing factions from the Hippodrome. A rebellion against taxes, against officials, against everything. the city ablaze. Megale Ecclesia, for the second time in its history, burns. 12 stone lambs fall from the architrave and shatter on the pavement. 2 temples, 172 years, both destroyed not by an external enemy, both burned by Christians themselves during their own internal conflicts. The first because of a bishop, the second because of taxes. Not once because of an invasion, not once because of infidels, only because of themselves. If this had happened once, it could be written off as an accident, twice as coincidence, but this is not coincidence. This is a pattern. The hill rejected every shell that was stretched over it. The first burned down after 44 years. The second after 117. The wooden roof burned. The stone basilica burned. The site would not accept Christian buildings. It spat them out, the way an organism rejects a foreign organ. And so after the second fire, in January of 532, on the blood-soaked ruins of the Hippodrome, among 30,000 bodies, among charred beams and shattered lambs, one man makes a decision. He will not erect a third wooden basilica. He will not repeat the mistakes of his predecessors. He will build something the hill cannot reject, something so enormous, so heavy, so expensive, that it will press the pagan foundation into the earth once and for all. He will pay for it with 3 full years of imperial revenue. He will pay for it with uprisings in the provinces. He will pay for it with 30,000 corpses on the Hippodrome, corpses that had not yet gone cold when he signed the order to build. 40 days after the massacre, the first stone of the new foundation. His name was Justinian, the 13th of January in the year 532. Constantinople, the Hippodrome, 50,000 people in the stands. 2 feuding factions of chariot racing fans, the blues and the greens, had despised each other for centuries. They brawled in the streets, set fire to each other's neighborhoods, cut each other down in alleyways. But on this day, they are chanting the same word. Nika! Win! They have united against the emperor. Justinian at this point has ruled for 5 years. Formally, the rightful basileus. In practice, an upstart. Nephew of Justin I, a former swineherd from Illyria who clawed his way to the throne through military service and palace intrigues. Justinian received power not by blood, by inheritance from an uncle who had seized it himself. Legitimacy weak, authority on thin ice, and the ice is cracking. The cause of the revolt: taxes. Justinian had taxed the empire until the provinces groaned. Merchants, craftsmen, smallholders, all paying more than under any predecessor. The money went to the army, to campaigns in Africa and Italy, to grandiose building projects. And the crowd packed into the Hippodrome had had enough. The mob demands the dismissal of 2 chief officials, John the Cappadocian and Tribonian. Justinian yields, removes both. But the mob wants more. They want a new emperor. They drag out Hypatius, nephew of the late Emperor Anastasius, wrap him in purple, proclaim him Basileus. Justinian sits in the palace, by some accounts, in panic, by others, in paralysis. Ships are ready for flight. The treasury is already being loaded aboard. The imperial court stands at the gangway. And at this moment, Theodora, the wife, former actress, former dancer, former, if Procopius is to be believed, woman of the entertainment quarters. She rises and speaks the phrase that will enter every textbook. Purple is the noblest shroud. He who has worn the imperial purple has no right to flee. Better to lie in a coffin in the emperor's mantle than to live out one's days as a fugitive. Justinian stays, and gives the order. 2 generals, Belisarius and Mundus, enter the Hippodrome with squads of mercenaries. Heruli, Goths, men who care not at all whom they cut down. The stands of the hippodrome become a slaughterhouse. No exits. The gates are blocked. 50,000 people locked in a stadium with professional killers. The butchery continues until the living run out. By the chronicler's estimates, 30,000 perished. 30,000 bodies on the stands, on the arena floor, in the corridors. Blood running down the marble steps. This relates to a scale that must be spoken aloud. 30,000 is the population of an average European city of the 6th century. An entire city cut down in one day. In a stadium, in the capital of a Christian empire, on the orders of a Christian emperor. Hypatius is seized. He had not wanted the throne, he was dragged out by force. No one asked him. Justinian has him executed. The body is thrown into the sea. Purple did indeed prove to be a shroud, only not Justinian's. 40 days after the massacre, the 23rd of February in the year 532, Justinian signs the order for the construction of a new temple. 40 days. Not a year, not 10 years. 40 days. The bodies had not yet decomposed. The blood had not yet been washed from the hippodrome steps. And at that moment, the emperor lays the foundation of the building we see today. The official version. Justinian thanked God for saving his throne and dedicated a new temple to him. An offering of gratitude, an act of piety. Beautiful, convenient, a lie. Because there is a second version. Justinian was paying for his guilt. 30,000 slain, a weight that cannot be lifted by prayer. The temple is not gratitude. The temple is a payoff, blood money poured into marble and gold, an indulgence granted to himself, the most expensive bribe of one's own conscience in history. And there is a third version, the most uncomfortable one. Justinian was neither repenting nor giving thanks. He used the revolt. The Nika uprising gave him what he could not have obtained by any other means. A pretext to demolish an old temple laid by predecessors and associated with their dynasty. The Church of Theodosius was a monument to another bloodline. Justinian was not a descendant of Theodosius. He needed the fire. He needed a cleared site. And he got one, along with 30,000 corpses that guaranteed the total silence of any opposition for decades to come. This relates to a logic that historians prefer not to articulate. The Nika revolt destroyed all political opposition to Justinian, burned the buildings associated with the previous regime, and gave the emperor a pretext for the total reconstruction of the city centre. Everything in the way burned. Everyone in the way cut down. And on the cleared ground rose a temple dedicated not to God, but to Justinian personally. Because, and this is the key fact, when Justinian first entered the completed temple, he did not fall to his knees. He did not recite a prayer. He cried out, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." This phrase is cited by an anonymous source quoted in the Istanbul Encyclopedia by the 20th century historian Reshad Ekrem Koçu. Procopius, Justinian's personal historian, does not record it, and that too is eloquent. Procopius wrote the secret history, pouring out everything he could about Justinian, cruelty, paranoia, Theodora's debauchery. If the phrase, "I have surpassed thee, Solomon," were a fabrication, Procopius would have mocked it. He would have written something like, "The presumptuous man compared himself to the prophet Solomon." But Procopius is silent, completely, as though the phrase does not exist, as though what stands behind it is too dangerous even for a court critic. And what stands behind it? Think. Justinian compares himself not to the apostles, not to the church fathers, not to Constantine. He compares himself to Solomon, king of Israel, builder of the first temple in Jerusalem, the very temple that, according to the Old Testament, housed the Ark of the Covenant. Justinian was not competing with Christian rulers, he was competing with an Old Testament king, a figure whom Muslims regard as the prophet Suleiman, Jews as the greatest ruler of antiquity, and Christians as the symbol of wisdom. This relates to the direct, literal meaning. Justinian declared that his temple was larger and finer than the Temple of Solomon. Not a church, a temple, a word that in this context means not a place of prayer, but a place of power. 3 full years of the Byzantine Empire's revenue was spent on construction. 3 years' revenue, the army, the navy, the civil service, the provisioning of the provinces, all of it into one pot. The provinces, stripped of funding, revolted. Rebellions were crushed with the same ferocity as the Nika uprising. Procopius writes that the rebels were crucified with the declaration that they were acting against the will of the Almighty. The construction of the temple became state ideology. Whoever opposes the temple opposes God. Whoever opposes God goes on the cross. A convenient formula. Justinian wielded it without the slightest hesitation. 10,000 workers, 5 years of construction, 100 master overseers, each with 100 men under him. Materials from across the empire, columns from Egypt, marble from the Sea of Marmara, brick from Rhodes. Provincial governors received a personal directive. Bring the most exquisite artifacts from the ancient ruins in your territories to Constantinople. This was not a request, it was a command. The empire labored for a single building, the way Egypt once labored for a single pyramid. On the 27th of December, in the year 537, the consecration. Justinian rides in a chariot from the palace to the temple, enters through the imperial gate, runs to the altar, raises his eyes, and cries out, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." Not, "God, I thank thee." Not, "In the name of Christ." "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." This is not a prayer, this is a declaration. The man standing beneath the dome is not thanking God. He is challenging a king of antiquity. He is announcing that his building is larger, richer, and more magnificent than the temple that once held the Ark of the Covenant. And here is what is curious. Justinian is not competing with a church, he is competing with a temple, a structure that in the Old Testament tradition was built by the direct command of God, from blueprints given to Solomon from above. Justinian does not say, "I have built a finer church." He says, "I have surpassed God's design." This is not piety, this is hubris on a scale without parallel in the history of Christianity. In competing with Solomon, Justinian did something no Christian ruler before him had ever done. He dispatched an order across the entire empire. "Bring me columns from pagan temples. Do not break them, do not grind them to gravel, bring them whole." He was not destroying the pagan legacy, he was collecting it. In one place, under one dome, and using it as the building material for an edifice in which he declared himself above a prophet. Justinian's order was simple. To the governors of every province, from Egypt to Gaul, from Syria to Dalmatia, bring to Constantinople the most exquisite artifacts from the ancient ruins in your territory. Not rubble, not fragments, whole columns, whole capitals, whole blocks of marble. An empire stretching across 3 continents operated as a conveyor belt. At one end, the ruins of pagan temples. At the other, the construction site of Hagia Sophia. Let us count. 140 monolithic columns inside the building. 140, not brick piers faced with stone, monoliths. Each one a single piece of rock, quarried from a mountainside, dressed, polished, and shipped hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers by sea. The weight of a single porphyry column, roughly 70 tons. Transporting such a load in the 6th century on a wooden ship, without cranes, without engines, is an engineering feat in itself. But Justinian did not need engineering. He needed magic, and he knew where to find it. 8 green marble columns, Thessalian green stone, quarried in only one region of Greece. But the columns of Hagia Sophia did not come from a quarry. They came from the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, that very one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. A temple worshipped by dozens of peoples for 1,000 years. A temple burned by Herostratus in 356 before our era, on the night Alexander the Great was born, if Plutarch is to be believed. A temple rebuilt and destroyed again. A temple whose remains were already being carted off for building material under Archbishop John Chrysostom, the very Chrysostom whose exile caused the burning of the first Hagia Sophia. The circle closes. The columns of the goddess, whose legacy indirectly burned the first temple, now stand inside the third. These 8 columns do not stand in some corner. They do not prop up a secondary gallery. They are placed beneath the semi-domes, the chief structural elements of the building. The semi-domes transfer the load from the central dome to the walls. Without them, the entire structure collapses. This relates to a concrete engineering fact. The columns of Artemis carry the Christian vault on their shoulders. Literally, physically, a pagan goddess holds up the dome under which the name of Christ has been spoken for 1,500 years. And now, the name of Allah. Next, 8 red porphyry columns. Porphyry, the stone of emperors, deep purple, almost black with red veins. In the Roman Empire, porphyry symbolized absolute power. Only emperors had the right to wear porphyry garments. Only in porphyry chambers did empresses give birth, hence the term porphyrogenitus, born in the purple. The sole deposit on the planet, the quarry of Mons Porphyrites in the eastern desert of Egypt, between the Nile and the Red Sea. By the mid-5th century, the quarry was closed, exhausted. New porphyry could be obtained nowhere. This means one thing. The 8 porphyry columns of Hagia Sophia were not freshly quarried. They were extracted from existing buildings. From which ones? Procopius does not specify. Official sources say from Heliopolis, from the Temple of the Sun, Baalbek, as the Arabs called it. Heliopolis, city of the sun in Greek. This relates to one of the oldest religious centers of the Near East. Baalbek was a sacred city long before the Greeks, long before the Romans. The Phoenicians worshipped Baal here. The Romans built a temple of Jupiter, the largest temple complex in the empire. Its columns, the largest ever erected, 22 meters tall, nearly 2.5 meters in diameter. And from this place, from a city dedicated to the sun, from a temple dedicated to the supreme god of Rome, red columns were shipped to Constantinople for Hagia Sophia. Sunstone from the Temple of the Sun, inside a temple aligned to the axis of the winter solstice. Coincidence? Or a design decision? But Egypt and Ephesus were not the only donors. Marble was brought from Pergamon, the city where the famous altar of Zeus once stood, one of the marvels of the Hellenistic world. White Proconnesian marble, from the island of Marmara in the Sea of Marmara, where quarries had been operating since the 5th century before our era, supplying stone to the entire ancient world. Celtic marble, from Gaul, the territory of modern France. Every stone with its own history, every stone from its own temple. Scholars call this spolia. Spolia, a Latin term, literally spoils, trophies. In an architectural context, the reuse of building materials from earlier structures. It sounds neutral. It sounds like recycling. In practice, it was cultural confiscation. You defeat another god, and you set his columns in your own temple. Not as a tribute, as a demonstration of victory. Like captive slaves in a triumphal procession. Italian researchers Alessandra Guiglia and Claudia Barsanti devoted an academic study to this phenomenon. spolia in Constantinople's Hagia Sophia from the age of Justinian to the Ottoman period. Their conclusion: Hagia Sophia is a multi-layered museum of spolia. Every era added its own layer of trophies. The Byzantines hauled columns from pagan temples. The Ottomans incorporated Byzantine elements into mosque architecture. Each new owner made use of the body of the previous one, like a parasite that does not destroy the host but uses its skeleton. But there is one object that tour guides do not mention at all. In the outer narthex of Hagia Sophia, in the passage through which every visitor enters the building, stands an altar of red porphyry. Low, roughly hewn, without inscriptions. It is a pagan sacrificial altar, a stand for burning incense, presumably from the final years of Constantinople's functioning pagan temples. Its age, at least 1,500 years. It stands at the entrance to the principal temple of Eastern Christianity, then at the entrance to the principal mosque of the Ottoman Empire, then at the entrance to the most visited museum in Turkey, and once again at the entrance to a mosque. 4 changes of sign, and the pagan altar stands in the same spot. Nobody has removed it. Not Christians, not Muslims, not the secular state of Ataturk. Why? This relates to an uncomfortable question. If Hagia Sophia is a Christian temple, why does it contain a pagan altar? If it is a mosque, why does it house an idol? If it is a museum, why was it not labeled with a plaque reading "Pagan Altar, 5th to 6th century"? The answer: because any label would draw attention, and attention to questions with no convenient answers. 400 meters from Hagia Sophia stands the Basilica Cistern, an underground reservoir built under Justinian. 336 columns support the vaults, and in the far corner, 2 columns with bases carved as heads of Medusa the Gorgon. One upside down, the other turned on its side. The official explanation: they were used simply as pedestals of the required height. The unofficial one, an inverted Medusa, is a symbol of subjugation. A pagan deity placed head down is not recycling, it is ritual. This is what was done with the idols of defeated peoples, turned upside down, buried face first, trodden into foundations. Not destroyed, humiliated, so that their power would serve the new master. The same researchers who worked at Hagia Sophia believe the Medusa heads were taken from shuttered pagan temples of Constantinople, from temples that Constantine and his successors did not demolish, but sealed beneath foundations. The Medusas ended up under the city, literally underground. Like all of Constantinople's pagan heritage, hidden, inverted, but preserved. Justinian did not build a Christian temple from Christian materials. He built something else. He gathered fragments of defeated religions, from Ephesus, from Heliopolis, from Baalbek, from Pergamon, from Gaul, and assembled them at a single point. 140 columns from different temples of different gods. Porphyry from the Temple of the Sun, green marble from the Temple of the Moon, an altar from a temple whose name has been erased, Medusas from temples buried beneath the city. All of it, inside one building, under one dome. Is this economy on building materials, or something fundamentally different? The ancient Romans believed in the genius loci, the spirit of a place. They believed that stone objects absorbed the power of the gods to whom they were consecrated. To transfer a column from one temple to another meant to transfer a portion of that power. Justinian grew up in a world where these beliefs had not yet fully faded. His capital, Constantinople, was a city where Christianity had triumphed only 200 years earlier. 2 generations, nothing to stone. Stone remembers longer, and here is what resulted. 8 columns of Artemis carry the semi-domes. 8 columns of Heliopolis support the arcades. Marble from Baalbek clads the walls. Celtic stone lies in the floor, and above, a dome with the golden mosaic of Christ Pantocrator. Christ, on pagan shoulders. God, on the bones of gods. When today a Muslim rises to pray in Hagia Sophia, he bows toward Mecca. His forehead touches the carpet. Beneath the carpet, a 6th century marble floor. Beneath the floor, a foundation poured over the ruins of a pagan acropolis. And around him, columns that for 1,000 years before this received prostrations before the idol of Artemis of Ephesus. The building did not change its faith, it swallowed every faith. It stands on the bones of Apollo, on the shoulders of Artemis, on the blood of Justinian's victims, and allows each new owner to believe it belongs to him alone. But the columns are what you can see. Walk in, raise your head, read the plaque. The chief pagan secret of Hagia Sophia is hidden not in stone. It is hidden in geometry, in those degrees, minutes and seconds by which the building is turned relative to the cardinal points. In that single spot on the horizon toward which its main axis gazes. And in that one day of the year when the sun enters the temple the way it entered the temples of Heliopolis 3,000 years ago. Any Christian church must be oriented to the east. This rule is older than any cathedral. The priest faces the rising sun, the symbol of the resurrection of Christ. The congregation looks the same way. The altar to the east, the entrance to the west. Simple, clear, canonical. And here is Hagia Sophia, the chief temple of Eastern Christianity, the cathedral of the ecumenical patriarch, the site of imperial coronations, violating this rule, bluntly, demonstratively, by 33.5 degrees. The main axis of Hagia Sophia is deflected from due east by 33.5 degrees to the south. Not 5, not 10, 33.5. This is not a builder's error. This is not the slope of the hill. This is not a miscalculation by 6th century surveyors. 33.5 degrees south of east is the precise direction of sunrise in Constantinople on the day of the winter solstice, the 21st of December, the longest night of the year, the moment when the sun reaches its lowest point on the horizon and begins to climb back. This is not the opinion of alternative historians. This is the conclusion of an academic study by Nadine Shibilla, published in the journal Science in Context in 2009. The finding, the orientation of the building's longitudinal axis coincides with sunrise on the winter solstice according to ancient computations, implying that the alignment was intentionally calculated to secure optimal natural illumination of the interior. Not possibly coincides, not approximately corresponds, coincides, intentionally calculated. This relates to a conclusion reached through computer modeling, astronomical data, and textual analysis of Byzantine sources, not a hypothesis, a result. What does this mean in practice? Once a year, on the 21st of December, the first ray of the rising sun enters through the window above the main western entrance of Hagia Sophia. It passes through the narthex, crosses the entire nave, 82 meters in length, and strikes the apse, the point where the Christian altar once stood. The beam travels precisely along the central axis, without deviation, without scattering, like an arrow. 40 windows at the base of the dome function as diffusers. They are positioned so that during the day, light pours in from all sides simultaneously, and the dome appears to float, as though it does not rest on walls but hangs in the air. Procopius described this effect in the 6th century, the dome suspended as if by a golden chain from heaven. But Procopius did not understand the mechanism. He thought it was a miracle of God. In fact, it was optics, calculation, the engineering of light executed by men who read not the Bible but Heron of Alexandria. Anthemius of Tralles, one of the two architects of Hagia Sophia, was not an architect in the modern sense. He was a mechanikos, a professor of mathematics and geometry, a specialist in conics, the theory of curved cross-sections, author of a treatise on burning mirrors, devices that focus sunlight to a point and ignite targets at a distance. Burning mirrors were the weapon of Archimedes. Legend holds that Archimedes set the Roman fleet ablaze at Syracuse by directing focused sunlight onto the ships using bronze shields. Anthemius studied precisely this technology. He knew how to control light, how to direct it, how to focus it. Isidore of Miletus, the second architect, was a physicist. He published the collected works of Archimedes. He wrote commentary on the treatises of Heron of Alexandria about vault construction. He worked with the texts of Ptolemy, the astronomer whose tables of stellar and solar positions were used until the 17th century. Isidore knew where the sun would be on any day of the year. He knew at what angle a beam would enter the building. He knew how to calculate orientation so that light would strike the right point at the right moment. This relates to a fact that changes everything. Hagia Sophia was not designed by theologians. It was designed by scientists working with a pre-Christian body of knowledge. With Archimedes, the Syracusan genius of the 3rd century before our era. With Heron, the Alexandrian mechanic of the 1st century. With Ptolemy, the Alexandrian astronomer of the 2nd century. With Euclid, the mathematician of the 4th century before our era. All four, pagans, not one, a Christian. The toolkit used to build Hagia Sophia is entirely and wholly pagan. And now, the key question. Why is the building oriented precisely to the winter solstice? The official Christian version goes like this. Christmas is celebrated on the 25th of December. The winter solstice falls on the 21st, a difference of 4 days. The temple is oriented toward the sunrise on Christmas morning. The symbolism, Christ, the light of the world, born on the darkest night. Beautiful. But there is a problem. Christmas was not always celebrated on the 25th of December. The earliest Christians did not celebrate the birth of Jesus at all. They celebrated his resurrection. The date, 25th of December, appears in the Roman calendar only in the 4th century. And it appears not by accident. The 25th of December is the date of the festival of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. The principal pagan holiday of the Roman Empire, established by Emperor Aurelian in the year 274. Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, was a cult uniting the solar deities of every people in the empire. Apollo, Mithras, the Syrian Elagabalus, all merged into a single image, the sun that defeats darkness on the longest night and begins its return. The 25th of December, the day the sun rises again. And it is precisely this date that Christians took for the birth of Christ. Not coincidence. Appropriation. The same method as with the columns of Artemis, not to destroy, to absorb. This relates to the central thesis. Hagia Sophia is oriented not toward the nativity of Christ, it is oriented toward the sun, toward the same astronomical moment that aligns pagan temples across the Mediterranean and beyond. The Temple of Amun at Karnak, Egypt, 15th century before our era. The main axis is directed towards sunrise on the winter solstice. The sun's ray passes through every hall and strikes the Holy of Holies. 3,000 years ago. Stonehenge, England, 3rd millennium before our era. Oriented along the solstice line, the solar beam passes between the stones and hits the central altar stone. 4,500 years ago. Newgrange, Ireland, 3,200 years before our era. An underground chamber into which light penetrates exactly once a year, on the day of the winter solstice, 5,000 years ago. And Hagia Sophia, Constantinople, the year 537 of our era. The main axis is directed towards sunrise on the winter solstice. The solar beam passes through the entire nave and strikes the apse. 1,500 years ago. 4 buildings, 4 epochs. 4 civilizations. The same orientation, the same point on the horizon, the same date. And mainstream scholarship insists that in the case of Hagia Sophia, this is Christian symbolism, while in the case of Karnak, it is pagan astronomy. The same technique, 2 different labels. The substitution continues. Computer modeling of daylight illumination, conducted by research teams from Princeton and Zurich, produced additional results. Christmas morning is the moment of the most dramatic interior lighting. Light floods the nave with gold. The mosaics blaze. The marble glows from within. The 40 windows of the dome turn the building into a crown of light. Anyone standing inside at that moment experiences a physical shock. The space expands, the ceiling vanishes, the dome floats. This is not mysticism. This is geometry. Calculated with a precision that in the 6th century was available only to those who worked with Ptolemy's astronomical tables. But here is what made it into no guidebook. The modeling showed that the light effect works not only at Christmas, it works at every sunrise, with varying intensity. The building tracks the sun all year round. Morning services were tied to the solar cycle. Priests knew at which moment light would strike the altar, at which moment it would illuminate the ambo, at which moment it would flood the side aisles. The liturgy was choreographed by the sun, not by clocks, not by bells, by the sun. As at Karnak, as in any pagan temple built by priests who were simultaneously astronomers. Hagia Sophia is not a church with beautiful lighting. It is an astronomical instrument the size of a city block. Gigantic sundial clad in marble and gold. For 1,000 years, Orthodox priests conducted the liturgy, entered the sanctuary, raised the chalice, and did not suspect that they stood inside a device engineered according to the patterns of pagan optics and pagan astronomy. They thought it was grace. Procopius thought it was a golden chain from heaven. Pilgrims thought it was a miracle. In reality, it was Archimedes, Heron, and Ptolemy. 3 pagans controlling the light from behind the walls of a Christian temple. The building knows what day it is. It needs no calendar. It needs no priest. It needs no imam. The sun enters and the building answers. Every morning. For 1,500 years, regardless of which name is written above the door. Anthemius and Isidore built a marvel. They took pagan knowledge, pagan materials, pagan orientation, and encased all of it in a Christian shell. On the outside, crosses, mosaics, gold. On the inside, Archimedes, Ptolemy, the solstice. A shape-shifting temple. A building with a false bottom. A cathedral that pretends to be a church but functions as an observatory. For 21 years, that shell held. For 21 years, the dome stood. And then, it cracked. And what was inside burst free. On the 27th of December, in the year 537, Justinian stands beneath the dome and cries out, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." On the 7th of May, in the year 558, that dome lies on the floor. 21 years, exactly 21. Between triumph and catastrophe, the span in which a person is born and becomes an adult. Justinian is still alive. He is 76. He still sits on the throne. And he watches as his greatest creation turns into a heap of stone. An earthquake. A series of tremors from December of 557 through May of 558. Constantinople sits on one of the most active seismic faults in the world, the North Anatolian Fault. Over 1,500 years, Dozens of devastating earthquakes have torn through this city. But the dome of Hagia Sophia did not merely crack, it collapsed completely. The central vault, the entire upper structure, hundreds of tons of stone and mortar, down, onto the marble floor, onto the pagan columns, onto the omphalion, onto everything Justinian had called his victory over Solomon. The Princeton study, a structural analysis of the building conducted by a team from Princeton University, states it plainly. The ambitious design led to the complete collapse of the main dome merely 21 years after its construction. Ambitious design. A diplomatic phrase. Translated into ordinary language, Anthemius and Isidore attempted something no one had ever done. They built a shallow dome, nearly a saucer, 31 meters across at a height that created the illusion of levitation. The dome was too flat, the load distributed unevenly. The lateral walls splayed outward. The architects knew the mathematics of Archimedes and the optics of Heron, but they did not know the structural mechanics of the 20th century. And the building took its revenge. Here is what is astonishing. No description of the first dome has survived. Procopius saw the original. Agathias saw the original. Paul the Silentiary, Justinian's court poet, wrote an entire poem about Hagia Sophia and described the original interior. All three left texts, but from none of them can the shape of the first dome be reconstructed. The Princeton researchers put it this way: the original form and function of this prominent component of Anthemius's and Isidorus's original design were forgotten in the course of time. Forgotten, not lost in a fire, not destroyed by enemies, forgotten, as though someone took care to ensure that the memory of the first dome was erased, along with the memory of its humiliating collapse. This relates to an uncomfortable question. How does one forget the shape of a dome that was the largest man-made vault on the planet? Millions saw it. Chroniclers described it. It was depicted on coins. And nothing. A void. We know what Greek temples looked like that were destroyed 1,000 years before Justinian. We know what the Colossus of Rhodes looked like, and it stood for only 54 years. But what the dome of Hagia Sophia looked like, the largest building in the Christian world, we do not know. Someone erased this information, and erased it professionally. Justinian entrusts the reconstruction to Isidore the Younger, nephew of the first Isidore. The new dome rises 7 meters higher than the previous one. The shape, steeper, closer to a hemisphere, less visually dramatic but more structurally stable. The new dome is consecrated in 562. Justinian is still alive. He is 80. Within 3 years, he will be gone. But the new dome is no longer his. It is the dome of his nephew engineer. Justinian defeated Solomon, and 21 years later lost to gravity. And then the cycle begins. The year 989, an earthquake. Part of the dome collapses. The western arch cracks. Repairs take 6 years. The dome is patched, but this is no longer the dome Isidore the Younger built. It is a patch upon a patch. The year 1346, another earthquake. The southeastern section of the vault caves in. Massive stone blocks crash to the floor. The building tilts. To save the structure, flying buttresses are added on 4 sides. Enormous stone props that literally hold the walls from splitting apart. Hagia Sophia ceases to be an elegant engineering marvel. It becomes a patient on crutches. The building Justinian conceived as a challenge to God now holds together on stone props like an old man on walking sticks. 1847 to 1849. Sultan Abdul Majid invites the Italian brothers Gaspare and Giuseppe Fossati for a total reconstruction. The Fossatis are not archaeologists, not conservators, practical engineers. They do what no one before them dared. They remove the medieval buttresses and replaced them with iron hoops, tension bands around the base of the dome. 19th century technology, instead of stone props, metal reinforcement. Instead of external crutches, an internal corset. It is precisely these iron bands that hold the dome today. Not the genius of Anthemius, not the calculations of Isidore. Italian iron tightened by Turkish workers on the orders of an Ottoman sultan. This relates to a fact that completely changes perception. The dome of Hagia Sophia is not a Byzantine miracle of the 6th century. It is an engineering structure that collapsed at least 3 times, was patched at least 4 times, was propped on crutches for 500 years, and was ultimately held together with iron in the 19th century. What stands above the heads of tourists today is a collage. 6th century fragments, 10th century patches, 14th century buttresses, 19th century iron, and 20th century restoration inserts. 5 epochs in a single vault, and not one of them is Justinian's. And yet, and here is what is truly inexplicable, the building stands. 1,500 years, on one of the most seismically active faults on the planet. Dozens of devastating earthquakes have struck this city. In 2015, a PBS NOVA team built an 8-ton model of Hagia Sophia and placed it on a hydraulic shake table simulating earthquakes. They shook the model until it began to fail. The engineer's conclusion: the building has survived seismic loads that should have destroyed it. Repeatedly. By every calculation, Hagia Sophia should not be standing. It should have collapsed permanently centuries ago, but it stands. The dome fell, the walls cracked, the arches spread. And every time, someone came and repaired it. Isidore the Younger, in the 6th century. Anonymous Byzantine engineers, in the 10th. Unknown masters, in the 14th. The Fossatis, in the 19th. The Turkish Restoration Service, in the 20th. The building draws repairers like a magnet. It will not allow itself to fall. Every time the top collapses, from below, from the foundation, from the columns, from the pagan core, rises an impulse: restore me, and people restore it. Without asking why. The columns of Artemis have never cracked. The porphyry pillars of Heliopolis have never shifted. The foundation standing on the pagan acropolis has never subsided. Only what is on top collapses. Only the dome. Only the Christian superstructure. The pagan skeleton, untouched. Do the math. 3 churches on this site. The first burned, the second burned, the third had its dome collapse. Then the dome was repaired, and it collapsed again. And again. And again. The top of the building has had to be replaced every few centuries, but the base, what was brought from the temples of Artemis and Heliopolis, what stands on the Thracian Acropolis, has not moved in 1,500 years. The building sheds every new head, but the body, the pagan body, remains unchanged. Justinian cried out, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." 21 years later, his dome lay on the floor. Solomon's temple stood for 410 years. Justinian's dome, 21. Who surpassed whom? Justinian challenged an Old Testament king, and lost. He challenged a pagan hill, and lost. His dome fell, his mosaics cracked, his name forgotten on the walls he built. But the hill stands, the columns stand, the foundation stands. The axis of the building still gazes toward sunrise on the 21st of December. As it gazed before Justinian, as it will gaze after. The building does not belong to whoever set the dome. The building belongs to whoever laid the foundation, and the foundation is pagan. But even the fallen dome is not the worst thing that happened to Hagia Sophia. An earthquake is a force of nature. It does not choose. It does not decide. It does not take revenge. People, however, do choose, and what people did to Hagia Sophia in the year 1204 is not a natural disaster. It is a deliberate decision, made by men who wore crosses on their chests. Men who swore to protect Christian holy places. Men who marched toward the Holy Land to save the tomb of Christ, and instead plundered the greatest temple of their own faith. The 12th of April in the year 1204. The walls of Constantinople, the mightiest fortifications of the Middle Ages, are breached. Not by Turks, not by Arabs, not by Persians, by Frenchmen and Venetians, men who wore crosses on their cloaks. Men who had sworn an oath to the Pope, march to the Holy Land, liberate Jerusalem, return the tomb of Christ to the Christian world. Instead of Jerusalem, they came to Constantinople. Instead of the Holy Sepulchre, they broke into Hagia Sophia. The Fourth Crusade, the most shameful military campaign in the history of Western Christianity. It began in the usual way. Pope Innocent III declared a new crusade. The target, Egypt, the gateway to Palestine. Knights from France and Flanders assembled in Venice to board ships. But the money fell short. 85,000 silver marks, the price the Venetian Doge Enrico Dandolo demanded for the crossing. The Crusaders could not scrape together half. Dandolo, a blind 90-year-old, the shrewdest politician in the Mediterranean, proposed a deal. Work off the debt with services. The first service, take the city of Zara on the Adriatic, which had rebelled against Venice. The Crusaders took it. Zara was a Christian city. The Hungarian king to whom it belonged was himself a crusader. The Pope excommunicated the entire army. The army did not care. The second service proved richer. A Byzantine prince named Alexius turned to the Crusaders with a plea. Restore my father to the throne, and he will pay for the entire campaign and provide 10,000 soldiers. The Crusaders turned toward Constantinople. Put Alexius on the throne. Alexius did not pay. The Crusaders grew furious. And in the spring of 1204, they stormed the city. On the 12th of April, Venetian ships approached the sea walls from the Golden Horn. A few dozen knights scrambled over the wall. They punched a breach. The main force poured through. Discipline collapsed instantly. 3 days, 72 hours. That is how long the systematic plundering of the greatest city in the Christian world lasted. Hagia Sophia, the first target. Crusaders rode into the temple on horseback. Hooves struck the marble floor that remembered the coronations of emperors. They slipped on 6th century mosaics. The high altar, a work of art, an alloy of precious metals fused into a single multicolored object, was hacked apart with swords and axes, into pieces, to be divided among the companies. Silver wall cladding ripped off, gold icon casings torn away and melted down, marble slabs pried from the floor and loaded onto Venetian galleys. This relates to the account left by the chronicler Geoffrey de Villehardouin, one of the campaign's leaders. He wrote about the fire that consumed the city. The blaze burned so fiercely that it raged all night and all the next day until evening, and more houses burned in that city than exist in any 3 of the greatest cities of the Kingdom of France. These are not the words of a victim, these are the words of a participant. He recorded them with pride. But Villehardouin did not describe what happened inside Hagia Sophia. That was done by another chronicler, Niketas Choniates, a Byzantine historian who witnessed the devastation with his own eyes. Horses drank from the marble baptismal font. Sacred vessels, communion chalices, crosses, reliquaries were melted down on the spot. Mules were led directly into the nave to carry off the plunder. The animals slipped on the wet marble, fell, leaving blood and dung on the floor. And onto the patriarchal throne, the throne from which the ecumenical patriarch had governed the entire Orthodox Church for 1,000 years, they seated a woman. a Western prostitute, returned from her pre-battle exile. She sat on the throne, threw back her head, and sang obscene songs. Then she leapt up and began to dance around the altar, on the wreckage of the very altar that had been hacked apart an hour before. The Crusaders applauded. They drank wine from the liturgical chalices, church wine from church vessels, in a church they had just desecrated. The relics carried off, the crown of thorns of Christ, to Paris. King Louis IX would later purchase it from the Latin emperor and build Sainte-Chapelle to house it. The most beautiful Gothic chapel in Europe, built for stolen relics. The Veil of the Virgin Mary, to Chartres Cathedral, where it remains to this day. A fragment of the true cross, to Bruges, to the treasury of the city cathedral. The bronze horses from the Hippodrome, a team of 4 gilded horses, the symbol of Constantinople, shipped to Venice and mounted on the facade of the Basilica of St. Mark. They stand there still. More precisely, copies stand on the facade. The originals are inside the museum. For 800 years, stolen horses have adorned the principal church of Venice. And not a single plaque reads, "Looted from Constantinople in 1204. This relates to a scale of cultural plunder without parallel in history before the 20th century. By 1204, Constantinople was the largest collection of ancient art in the world. 900 years, from the 4th to the 13th century, sculptures, manuscripts, mosaics and jewels had been brought here from across the former Roman Empire. 3 days in April of 1204, and all of it scattered across Western Europe, or destroyed. Libraries, burned. The last copies of ancient texts, lost forever. Sculptures, smashed for their bronze. Baldwin of Flanders was crowned in Hagia Sophia as Latin emperor. A Flemish count on the throne of the Byzantine Basileus. The Orthodox Church was swept out, the Catholic Rite installed. From 1204 to 1261, Hagia Sophia was a Catholic temple. 57 years, neither the Vatican nor Istanbul likes to remember this period. And now, Doge Enrico Dandolo, the blind old man who orchestrated the entire operation, the man who steered the Crusader army toward Constantinople, the man who enriched Venice with plundered marble and bronze. He perished in Constantinople in 1205. He was past 90. He was buried in Hagia Sophia, inside, in the wall. The tomb is still there, empty. The bones were removed long ago, but the marble slab with its inscription remains in place. The man who plundered the temple lies buried in the temple he plundered, and no one in 800 years has removed his remains. Not the Orthodox when they recovered the building in 1261, not the Muslims when they took it in 1453, not Ataturk when he made it a museum, not Erdoğan when he restored the mosque. The looter lies in the looted temple, and all 6 owners have accepted this. This relates to a strange pattern. The building absorbs everyone. It does not expel, it absorbs. Those who built it, those who plundered it, those who renamed it, all become part of the walls. Dandolo wanted to strip Hagia Sophia and became part of it. Forever. The Crusaders took everything that could be taken. The altar, the icons, the silver, the gold, the relics, the mosaics, the manuscripts. But they did not take the walls. They did not take the columns. They did not take the foundation. They did not shift the axis of the building. The pagan skeleton remained in place. The 8 columns of Artemis stood. The 8 columns of Heliopolis stood. The porphyry altar in the narthex stood. The omphalion in the floor lay in place. The axis toward the winter solstice held true. The Crusaders tore the Christian skin off Hagia Sophia. They stripped away everything accumulated over 900 years, cladding, decoration, relics, and they exposed what lay beneath. The pagan frame, the bones of Artemis, the stone of Heliopolis, the marble of Baalbek, that which cannot be stolen because it is the structure itself, that which cannot be shipped away because without it the building collapses. The most brutal plundering of Hagia Sophia was committed not by Muslims. It was committed by Christians, those who bore the cross, those who swore by the name of Christ, those who marched to liberate the Holy Land and lingered in Constantinople because looting proved more profitable than fighting. And after this, for another 250 years, Byzantium pretended the temple was still sacred, a sanctuary robbed by its own, a sanctuary without an altar, without relics, without gold, but with pagan columns standing as they always had. The pagan hill laughed at both sides. The Byzantines would reclaim Hagia Sophia in 1261. Michael VIII Palaiologos would reconquer Constantinople and reconsecrate the temple by the Orthodox rite, restore the mosaics, repair what could still be repaired. But it would no longer be the same Hagia Sophia. The empire bled dry, the treasury empty, the city half in ruins. The Latin sack had wounded Byzantium so deeply that it would never recover. For 250 years, the Palaiologoi would cling to the wreckage, patch the walls, beg for help from the West, the same West that had robbed them. And the West would help, in drops, with conditions, with contempt. Until in 1453, the man who would not pretend approached the walls of Constantinople. He would not feign peace. He would not hide behind a cross and a vow. He would come with cannons. He was 21 years old. His name was Mehmed. The 29th of May in the year 1453. Tuesday, 5 in the morning. The walls of Constantinople, those same walls the Crusaders breached from the sea in 1204, are now breached from the land. The cannon called basilica, cast by the Hungarian engineer Erdoğan, fires stone balls weighing half a ton. The projectiles fly 1.5 kilometers. A wall that withstood 1,000 years of sieges cannot withstand 53 days of bombardment. Through the breach pour the Janissaries. Constantinople is a ghost city. By 1453, 50,000 people live here. Once, 1 million. Entire neighborhoods, empty. Walls, patched. Treasury, zero. The last emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, begged Europe for help. Europe sent 700 Genoese mercenaries, 700 men against 80,000 of the Ottoman army. The emperor perished in the fighting at the walls. His body has never been found. Purple once again became a shroud, but this time literally. Mehmed II, 21 years old, the age at which a modern person finishes university. At that age, Mehmed took the city that no one had been able to take for 1100 years. The Arabs tried, in 674, in 717. The Bulgars tried, the Rus tried. All retreated. Mehmed did not retreat. The chronicles describe the moment thus. The Sultan rides into the city on horseback, heads for Hagia Sophia, enters through the imperial gate, the same gate through which only the Basileus had passed for 1,000 years. The floor of the temple is wet. Inside, thousands of civilians who had sought refuge. They believed an ancient prophecy. When the enemy entered the city, an angel would descend from heaven and drive the invaders away with a sword. The angel did not descend. Soldiers burst into the temple first. People were seized, bound, led away, sold into slavery. Icons smashed, silver broken. Mehmet rode across a floor slick with blood. The horse slipped. The chronicler writes that the Sultan was forced to ride because walking over the bodies was impossible. And here, Mehmet's first order inside Hagia Sophia: not destroy, not burn, not demolish. The order: preserve. Cease the looting. The building is sacrosanct. This relates to a fact that radically distinguishes Mehmed from the Crusaders of 1204. They stripped Hagia Sophia bare and danced on the wreckage of the altar. Mehmed entered and halted the destruction. Christians plundered their own temple. A Muslim preserved it. The first prayer was read that same day, or, by other accounts, on the first Friday after the conquest. Mehmed personally attended. Hagia Sophia became a mosque. The name Hagia Sophia Camii. But what exactly Mehmed does with the building, this is where it gets interesting. The mosaics, the central question. Immense figures of Christ, the Virgin, archangels, emperors, covering the walls and vaults. Islam forbids the depiction of living beings in places of prayer. Mehmed should destroy them. The logic is simple: new faith, new walls. But Mehmed does not destroy, he covers. Plaster over the mosaics. A thin layer of lime, and the face of Christ vanishes. Not shattered, not scraped. Hidden, under millimeters of white morite. Stop, this needs to be said again. A 21-year-old sultan who has just stormed the greatest city in the Christian world does not destroy the Christian images. He hides them. He lays a layer over a layer. As Constantius laid a Christian temple over the pagan acropolis, as Justinian built pagan columns into a Christian vault, Mehmed does exactly the same thing, only in reverse. An Islamic layer over a Christian one, not replacement. Not destruction, superimposition. But here is what does not fit the standard version. Swedish researchers working in Hagia Sophia in the 18th century documented that nearly all the mosaics that existed in 1453 were still in place and visible centuries after the conquest. They could be examined up close. They were not fully plastered over under Mehmed. Partial plastering, yes. Total, no. The complete covering of the mosaics occurred only in 1847 to 1849, under Sultan Abdul Majid, by the hands of the Fossati brothers, the same Italians who tightened the dome with iron hoops. The Fossatis received an order: remove the old plaster, restore the mosaics, document them, and cover them again, with a fresh layer. This relates to a paradox that defies comprehension. Italian Catholics, working on the orders of an Ottoman sultan, restore Byzantine Orthodox mosaics, only to then cover them again with Muslim plaster. Why restore what you intend to hide? Why repair what no one will see? The only explanation: Abdul Majid knew the value of what he was hiding, and he wanted what lay beneath the plaster to be a perfect image, not a crumbling fragment. Conservation, not destruction, conservation. For whom? For what future? 4 waves of concealment. The first, the year 726. The iconoclasts. Christians themselves. Emperor Leo III, the Isaurian, bans the veneration of icons. Across Byzantium, pogroms. Monks beaten, icons burned. Mosaics in churches, plastered over or chiseled off. Hagia Sophia, no exception. The first layer of plaster over Christian images was applied by Christians, 727 years before Mehmed. This relates to a fact that completely demolishes the narrative of Muslims covered our icons. Their own people covered them first. Their own people started it. The second wave, after 1453. Partial. The Ottomans add their layer, but not totally. The third wave, 1847 to 49. The Fossatis. Total. The fourth wave, 2020. Erdoğan. the mosaics of the Virgin and Christ drawn behind curtains on an electric rail. Not plastered, curtained. Technological progress, instead of plaster, fabric. Instead of lime, an electric motor. 4 layers of concealment: Christian, Muslim, Restoration, political. Beneath each, the previous one. A building palimpsest, a manuscript from which text was scraped and new text written. Yet the old shows through the ink. And here is the question nobody asks. What lies beneath the very bottom layer? Beneath the iconoclast plaster of 726? Beneath Justinian's mosaics? Beneath the first layer of mortar applied in 537? There, bare wall. A wall no one has examined. A wall beneath which there may be paintings from the first church, or the second, or from what came before them. Pagan frescoes, images of Apollo, ornaments of Aphrodite. No one has looked, because no one wants to find them. Now, the minarets. Mehmed orders a minaret built. The first, wooden, temporary. Like the first church of Constantius, temporary. A wooden mask. The minaret has not survived. The second, red brick, built by Bayezid II around 1481, on the southeastern corner. The third and fourth, white limestone, built by Mimar Sinan, the greatest architect of the Ottoman Empire, the man who built the Süleymaniye Mosque and hundreds of other structures. Sinan erects the minarets under Selim II and Murad III, and, critically, simultaneously reinforces the structure of Hagia Sophia, adds buttresses, strengthens the walls. Sinan is an engineer. He understands that a 6th century building is holding on at its limit, and he saves it. This relates to paradox number 2. A 16th century Muslim architect saves a 6th century Christian building standing on a pagan foundation from the first millennium before our era. 3 religions, 3 epochs, 1 engineer who does not care whose structure it is, only that it stands. And now, the mihrab. A niche in the wall indicating the direction of Mecca, a mandatory element of any mosque. The mihrab of Hagia Sophia was installed after the conquest of 1453, and it is installed not along the axis of the building. The axis of the building points towards sunrise on the winter solstice, 33.5 degrees south of east. The mihrab points toward Mecca, south-southeast from Istanbul. The 2 directions do not coincide. The divergence is significant. What does this mean? Muslims praying in Hagia Sophia bow toward the mihrab, toward Mecca. But the building, with its entire body, its entire axis, all its columns, all its foundation, faces in another direction, toward the sun, toward a point on the horizon that has nothing to do with Mecca or Jerusalem or Rome. The mihrab is an insert, a patch, an attempt to redirect a building that refuses to change course. Like a steering wheel bolted to a train. Turn it left, the train keeps going straight. Hagia Sophia did not submit to Islam, as it did not submit to Orthodoxy, as it did not submit to the Crusaders' Catholicism, as it did not submit to the iconoclasts. Every owner installed his own patch, a mihrab, a minaret, plaster, a curtain. Each believed the building was now his, but the axis, the same. The columns, the same. The foundation, the same. The building looks where it has always looked. Toward sunrise on the 21st of December, toward the pagan solstice, toward Sol Invictus, toward the unconquered sun. And no mihrab, no minaret, no plaster has changed that in 1,500 years. Mehmed did not conquer Hagia Sophia. He laid another layer over it, the 5th, or the 6th, if you count the iconoclasts and the Crusaders separately. Each layer thinner than the last. The pagan foundation, stone. The Christian mosaics, glass and gold. The Muslim plaster, lime. Erdoğan's curtains, fabric. Each successive owner covers the predecessor with lighter and lighter material, as though the building resists and each new layer holds less firmly than the one before. Stone endures 1,500 years. Plaster, 400. How long will curtains last? But even beneath the plaster, it is not the final layer. There is something that neither Christians nor Muslims ever saw, something that was not plastered over or curtained off, something left by people who came to this temple not to pray and not to plunder, but to mark it. People from the north, with swords, with runes, people for whom Hagia Sophia was neither a temple nor a mosque, but a place of power that needed to be claimed. The way a wolf marks territory, the way a warrior carves his name on the hilt of his sword. 1964. The upper gallery of Hagia Sophia. The southern wing. A marble parapet, the balustrade of the balcony from which Byzantine nobility watched the liturgy below for centuries. A tourist or researcher, the name is not recorded, notices strange scratches on the marble. Not Greek letters, not Arabic script, not Latin. Runes, Scandinavian runes, gouged into white marble with something sharp. A knife, a dagger, a spear tip. The inscription is worn by time. Only the tail is legible. Halfdan. Swedish rhinologist Elisabeth Svärdström publishes the find in 1970 in the journal Fornvännen. Her conclusion, Halfdan is the ending of the Old Norse name Halfdan. The full inscription most likely read, Halfdan carved these runes, or simply, Halfdan was here. For 1,000 years this inscription was in plain sight, on white marble, in a temple visited by millions, emperors, patriarchs, sultans, ambassadors, pilgrims, soldiers, merchants. 1,000 years, and nobody noticed. Or noticed but did not understand. Or understood but said nothing. Runes in the heart of the Orthodox world, a language spoken by none of those who owned the building, the mark of an outsider. In 1975, a second find. Folke Högberg from Uppsala discovers another runic inscription in a niche on the western side of the same gallery. The name, Arni. Högberg reports the find to the Department of Runes at the Stockholm Museum only in 1984. Publication appears in 1989. Archaeologist Mats Larsson independently discovers the same runes and prints an article in Fornvännen. This relates to how the system works. Between discovery and publication, 14 years. Between the second find and the first, 11. The runes lay in plain sight for 1,000 years. And even after discovery, decades were required before the world learned. Who were Halfdan and Arni? The official version, members of the Varangian Guard. Varangians, bodyguards of the Byzantine Emperor. Scandinavians, Norwegians, Swedes, Danes, who from the 9th to the 12th century served as mercenaries in Constantinople. An elite corps, the personal guard of the Basilevs, the only foreigners permitted to carry weapons inside the palace. The only ones admitted into Hagia Sophia with swords at their belts. The reconstruction of the moment, according to Atlas Obscura, goes like this. A warm Thracian Sunday, approximately 1,000 years ago. Liturgy is underway in Hagia Sophia. Long, solemn, in Greek, a language Halfdan does not understand. He stands on the upper gallery where the guard is posted. He is bored. He draws his knife and begins to scratch the marble. The letters, not Greek, his own, native, runes. Halfdan carved these runes. Or simply, Halfdan was here. Consider this, a bored soldier, a pagan from the north, a worshipper of Odin and Thor, stands in the holiest building of Eastern Christianity. Below, the Patriarch. On the walls, golden mosaics of Christ. In the air, incense. The choir sings, and Halfdan carves the marble. Not hiding, not ashamed. He does not consider this sacrilege. For him, this is not a holy place. It is a place of power. A beautiful, rich, enormous place where his employers, the Greeks, perform their incomprehensible rites. Halfdan does not pray. He marks. The way a wolf marks territory. The way a hunter notches a tree to mark his path. This relates to a fundamentally different perception of the building. For an Orthodox believer, Hagia Sophia was the house of God. For a Catholic crusader, a trophy. For a Muslim, a conquered mosque. For Halfdan, none of the above. For him, the building was what it had been before all of them, a place where power concentrates, a pagan perception, pre-Christian, the most ancient of all. And it is precisely this perception that left a physical trace on the marble, a trace that has outlived Orthodoxy, Catholicism, Islam, the secular museum, and the return to a mosque. Halfdan's runes stand to this day. They have outlasted every owner. But Halfdan is not the only uninvited guest. Researchers believe that other runic inscriptions may exist in the galleries of Hagia Sophia, not yet discovered or not yet deciphered. The marble is worn. The galleries were closed to the public for decades. What other marks the northern warriors left remains unknown. But the fact itself, runes in the walls of the chief temple of Byzantium, overturns the entire picture. The building attracted outsiders. It did not repel, it attracted. Greeks, Romans, Christians, Muslims, Vikings, all came. All left their mark. The building collected owners the way a tree collects notches, and there is in Hagia Sophia yet another object that belongs to none of the building's official religions: the weeping column. It stands in the north aisle, near the northwestern corner. A marble column sheathed in copper and bronze plates. In the plates, a hole, round, the size of a thumb. From the hole, moisture constantly seeps. The column is wet. Always. For 1,500 years. Regardless of the season, the air humidity, or the temperature. It sweats. It weeps. The legend is multi-layered. The Christian version. At this column, visions of St. Gregory the Wonder Worker occurred. Pilgrims pressed their ailments against the damp marble and were healed. The Muslim version. At this column, the body of the Muslim saint Khidr was found, a mysterious figure mentioned in the Quran, an immortal wanderer, patron of travelers. Both versions concern the same column. Both faiths venerate the same stone. Both ascribe supernatural power to it, and neither can explain why it is wet. This relates to the column's origin. According to tradition, confirmed by several researchers, the weeping column is a spolium, a trophy from a destroyed pagan temple, presumably from the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the same Artemis whose green columns carry the semi-domes of Hagia Sophia. If this is true, and definitive proof remains elusive, then the picture is astonishing. A pagan column from the temple of the goddess of the hunt, transported to a Christian cathedral, venerated as a Christian relic, venerated as a Muslim holy site, and belonging to neither Christianity nor Islam. The column is no one's, like the building itself. It stands, it weeps, it heals, in the opinion of those who believe. And it does not care who stands before it, an Orthodox pilgrim, a Muslim dervish, or a Scandinavian mercenary with a knife. Tourists still come to the weeping column. They push their thumb into the hole, twist clockwise, make a wish. This ritual is described in no Christian canon, in no Islamic text. It is folk superstition, or, the most ancient pagan practice, surviving into the 21st century under the cover of first a Christian, then a Muslim, then a museum label. And now, the Russian graffiti. Mentioned in passing, without detail. But the fact is documented. The majority of medieval graffiti found in Hagia Sophia were made by people from Rus. Not Greeks, not Latins, not Arabs. Russians. Princess Olga was baptized here in 957. The envoys of Prince Vladimir stood here in 987. And ordinary Russians, pilgrims, merchants, mercenaries, left their marks on the walls. Like Halfdan, like Arni, only in Cyrillic. This relates to a fact that shifts the perspective. Hagia Sophia is not solely Greek, Turkish, or Italian heritage. Russians were here before the Crusaders, before the Ottomans. Russian graffiti is older than Muslim plaster. People from Kiev, from Novgorod, from nameless villages on the Dnieper, came here, stood beneath the dome, touched the marble, and scratched their names on the walls. Beside Halfdan's runes, beside Greek prayers, beside Latin curses. All on the same walls, all in the same building, all uninvited guests whom the building received without distinction. The building does not filter, does not select, does not choose. Halfdan, a pagan. Arni, a pagan. Russian pilgrims, Orthodox. Crusaders, Catholic. Mehmed, Muslim. Ataturk, atheist. Erdoğan, Islamist. All came, all left their mark. All believed the building was theirs. Not one was right. Halfdan was here, more than 1,000 years before the first graffiti in a subway passage. He carved runes on the marble, the same marble on which empresses sat, from which patriarchs watched the liturgy, over which the fingers of Ottoman calligraphers once glided. For 1,000 years nobody noticed, or noticed and kept silent. A pagan's runes in the Temple of Christ that became the Mosque of Muhammad, an outsider's mark among insiders. And the building preserved it, did not erase it, did not plaster it over, did not curtain it off, preserved it, as it preserves everything else, as it preserves pagan columns, a pagan axis, a pagan foundation. The building is a collector. It gathers everyone and releases no one. But in Hagia Sophia, there is a place that was considered the center of the world. Not metaphorically, literally. A circular marble disc in the floor on which emperors stood for 1,000 years, receiving the crown from the patriarch. A place called the Omphalion, the navel of the earth. It lies directly beneath the feet of everyone who enters the building. And beside it, on the same floor, symbols that would make anyone flinch who knows what the swastika meant 3,000 years before Hitler. 4 million people a year enter Hagia Sophia, remove their shoes at the entrance, pull on overshoes, step onto a 6th century marble floor, raise their heads and look up, at the dome, at the mosaics, at the calligraphic medallions. Up, always up. No guidebook says, look down. It should. Because the central secret of Hagia Sophia is not on the ceiling. It is on the floor, underfoot, where nobody looks. In the southern part of the nave, to the right of the central axis, lies a mosaic circle. Large, complex, assembled from multicolored marble slabs, green, red, white, black, circles within circles. A large outer disc and a series of smaller discs around it, linked by marble bands. The pattern, geometrically flawless. This is the Omphalion, in Greek, navel, the navel of the earth, a place that for 1,000 years was considered the center of the world. Literally, not symbolically, literally. The 13th century, Antony of Novgorod, a Russian pilgrim, archbishop, one of the first Russian travelers to leave a written account of Constantinople, He enters Hagia Sophia and records, "There is a red marble stone with a golden throne placed on it. On this throne, the emperors were crowned." Red marble, a golden throne, the site of coronation, not the altar, the floor. Byzantine emperors received their crown not at the altar, not before the iconostasis, not on the steps. They received it standing on a marble circle in the floor, on the omphalion, on the navel of the earth. This relates to a fact that shatters the familiar image of an ecclesiastical coronation. In the Western tradition, Reims, Westminster, St. Peter's, coronation takes place at the altar. The center of power is vertical, God above, the anointed below. In Byzantium, different. The center of power is horizontal, a circle on the floor, a point from which all directions radiate. Not God crowns the emperor. Rather, the emperor stands at the center of the world, and the world revolves around him. This is not a Christian idea, it is pagan. The omphalos, the sacred stone in the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi. Egg-shaped white marble standing at the very center of the chief pagan oracle of ancient Greece. The Greeks believed Zeus released two eagles from opposite ends of the earth. They met at Delphi, and that place became the navel, the center, of the world. The omphalos stone marked this point. People came to it for prophecies. They brought offerings. Around it revolved the entire Greek cosmology. The world is a circle. At the center of the circle, Delphi. At the center of Delphi, the stone. Constantinople inherited this idea. When Constantine moved the capital from Rome to the Bosphorus, he transferred the concept as well. A new capital is a new center of the world, and a new center needs a new omphalos. Hagia Sophia, the chief temple of the new capital. The omphalion in the floor of Hagia Sophia is the direct descendant of the Delphic stone. Delphi, the sanctuary of Apollo. Apollo, god of the sun. The omphalion in Hagia Sophia, inside a building oriented toward the winter solstice. The line is straight, from Apollo to Justinian, from Delphi to Constantinople, from a pagan stone to a marble circle on which Christian emperors were crowned. This relates to the most uncomfortable of all facts in this film. The place where God's anointed were crowned for 1,000 years is a reproduction of a pagan object from a pagan god's temple. The patriarch placed the crown on the emperor. The emperor stood on the navel of the earth. The navel of the earth comes from the sanctuary of Apollo. 3 acts, 3 epochs, one and the same point. The Ottomans knew this, or at least sensed it. After 1453, the omphalion was covered with a carpet, a Turkish carpet. For 500 years, from the 15th century to the 20th, no one saw it. The carpet lay on the mosque floor. Muslims prayed on it without suspecting they stood on the navel of the earth, on the pagan center of the universe, on the stone where the basileus had been crowned. Or, they suspected, and that is precisely why they covered it. It was uncovered only under Ataturk. 1935. Hagia Sophia becomes a museum. The carpets are lifted, and for the first time in 500 years, the marble circle on the floor sees the light. Scholars documented, the omphalion is unique. Nowhere in the world is there an analogue of this scale and complexity. The only close parallel, a marble omphalion from the Hagia Sophia in Trabzon. It was removed by Greek refugees to Thessaloniki in 1924. 2 omphalions from 2 Hagia Sophias, both marble circles in the floor. Both laid in the Byzantine era. Both heirs to the Delphic stone. A system, not a coincidence. But the omphalion is not the only thing on the floor. In 2012, archaeologists working at ground level inside Hagia Sophia documented a geometric mosaic. Gold and green tesserae, 6th century, the age of Justinian. Among the geometric motifs, swastikas. Plural, not one random instance, many. Mosaic swastikas laid into the floor of the chief temple of the Byzantine Empire 15 centuries ago. Stop. Swastika. A word that makes any European flinch. A word associated with the 20th century, with Nazism, with horror. But the 6th century swastika is not a Nazi symbol. It is one of the oldest solar symbols in human history. It is at least 7,000 years old. It has been found in India, in Mesopotamia, in Greece, in Scandinavia, in Africa, in the Americas. The swastika is a stylized, rotating sun, a symbol of the solar cycle, a symbol of eternal return, a symbol of the very same unconquered sun, Sol Invictus, whose holiday on the 25th of December Christians turned into Christmas. This relates to what lies on the floor of Hagia Sophia, solar swastikas, the symbol of the sun god, inside a building oriented toward the solstice, standing on columns from the Temple of the Sun, dedicated to wisdom, a pagan concept. Everything converges on a single point. Everything points in one direction. Every element, the name, the columns, the axis, the floor, leads to the same source, a pre-Christian solar cult. In the ancient world, the swastika was ubiquitous. Greek vases, Roman mosaics, Etruscan jewelry, Celtic ornaments, everywhere the rotating cross. In Rome, the swastika decorated the floors of baths, porticos, and temples. It signified luck, fertility, solar power. When Justinian's craftsmen laid the floor mosaics of Hagia Sophia, they used the swastika as a standard decorative motif. For them, nothing unusual. For us, a shock. Because the 20th century stole the swastika's 7,000-year history and replaced it with a single meaning. But in the 6th century, it was a solar symbol, and it lies on the floor of a building that functions as a solar temple. Who laid the swastikas on the floor? Justinian's craftsmen. The same who worked under the direction of Anthemius and Isidore. A mathematician and a physicist. Men who built from the treatises of Archimedes and Ptolemy. Men who aligned the building to the winter solstice. Men who built pagan columns into a Christian vault. These same men laid solar symbols into the floor. And nobody, not the patriarch, not the emperor, not one of the thousands of priests who served here across 1,000 years, ordered them removed. Or did not notice. Or noticed and said nothing. This relates to the principle that has operated in Hagia Sophia from day one. The pagan elements are not hidden. They are in plain sight. The columns of Artemis are not in a basement. They carry the semi-domes. The pagan altar is not walled up. It stands in the narthex. The omphalion is not buried beneath the floor. It is the floor. The swastikas are not concealed under the mosaics. They are the mosaics. Everything open. Everything visible. You only need to look down. But 4 million people a year look up. Carpets lay on this floor for 500 years. Then they were removed, and the omphalion was revealed. In 2020, carpets were laid again. A mosque. Wall-to-wall carpet across the entire surface. An interesting detail, the one spot left uncovered is precisely the omphalion. The teal carpet goes around the marble circle. The pagan navel of the earth is the only fragment of floor visible in the functioning mosque, as though even the newest owners could not bring themselves to cover it, as though something stops the hand each time someone attempts to drape this circle. Superstition, respect, fear, and the swastikas, covered, carpet over them, again, hidden once more. As under Mehmed, as under Abdul Majid, solar symbols beneath a Muslim carpet, the sun god under the feet of the faithful, under the feet of 4 million tourists, under the feet of imams who read the prayer 5 times a day in a building that faces the sun. 4 million people a year walk across the floor of Hagia Sophia, photograph the dome, study the calligraphy, touch the weeping column, buy magnets at the exit, and not one looks down, does not notice the marble circle on which the rulers of the world were crowned for 1,000 years, does not notice the solar symbols laid by the same craftsman who built the dome, a pagan navel of the earth and pagan swastikas in the chief mosque of Istanbul, underfoot, in plain sight, for 1,500 years. Perhaps that is exactly what was intended. Perhaps Anthemius and Isidore knew people always look up, at the dome, at the sky, at God. Nobody looks down. And so the most important thing, they hid in the floor. Not behind walls, not beneath plaster, in the floor, where no one will find it, until they decide to lower their eyes. And now, the final question, the same one with which we began. What was it built for? Who does it truly belong to? And what does a pagan hill, a cathedral-sized sundial, and a marble navel of the earth have to do with Russian civilization? The answer, everything. Because it was here, in this building, in the year 957, that a woman was baptized who changed the fate of a people. And it was from here, from beneath this dome, in the year 987, that men emerged who decided, this faith shall be ours. Rus did not become Orthodox in Kiev. Rus became Orthodox here, in Hagia Sophia, on a pagan hill, beneath pagan columns, above pagan swastikas. The year 957, Constantinople, Hagia Sophia. Inside, a woman, not young, hard, accustomed to power. Princess Olga, ruler of Kievan Rus. She came here for one thing, to be baptized. Not in Rome, not in Jerusalem, not in any of the dozens of churches in Constantinople. Here, beneath this dome, on this floor, between these columns. Olga chose Hagia Sophia, and with that choice determined the fate of 150 million people for 1,000 years to come. Who was Olga? The widow of Prince Igor, whom the Drevlians tied to 2 bent birch trees and tore apart. A woman who in response burned the Drevlian capital, buried their envoys alive, and slaughtered their elders at a funeral feast. A person who understood power as few do. Power is not force, power is symbol, and she came to Constantinople for the symbol. Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus received Olga. By his own records, with ceremonies befitting a head of state, Olga was baptized in Hagia Sophia. She received a Christian name, Helena, after the mother of Constantine the Great, the same Constantine who moved the imperial capital to the Bosphorus and laid a Christian foundation over the pagan acropolis. This relates to a fact usually mentioned in passing. Olga did not receive the name of a random saint. She received the name of the woman who founded Christian Constantinople. The symbol, read, the message, delivered. Rus bound to Constantinople through a name, through baptism, through Hagia Sophia. Olga returned to Kiev. Her son Sviatoslav refused baptism. The retinue will laugh, he said. But Olga waited. She knew the seed was sown. Not in earth, in stone, in the marble of Hagia Sophia. And 30 years later, the seed sprouted. The year 987, the primary chronicle, the account that set the vector of a civilization. Prince Vladimir Sviatoslavich, Olga's grandson, decides to choose a faith for Rus. Envoys arrive. The Volga Bulgars offer Islam, the Germans, the Latin Rite, the Khazars, Judaism, the Greeks, Orthodoxy. Vladimir sends his own envoys to examine each faith firsthand. The envoys return, about the Muslims, skeptical, about the Latins, unimpressed, about the Khazars, doubtful, and about Constantinople, here is what they say. They led us to the place where they serve their God, and we knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth. For on earth there is no such splendor or such beauty, and we are at a loss how to describe it. We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth. This is about Hagia Sophia, not about doctrine, not about theology, not about the creed, about a building, about the light that floods the nave through 40 windows in the dome, about marble that glows, about golden mosaics blazing in the morning sun. Vladimir's envoys did not choose a theology, they chose an experience, and Hagia Sophia gave them an experience that outweighed everything else. This relates to the most astonishing fact of Russian history. The choice of faith for Rus was determined not by a priest, not by a theologian, not by a book. It was determined by a building, by architecture, by the optics of Anthemius, by the geometry of Isidore, by light calculated from the tables of Ptolemy, by pagan instruments embedded in a Christian shell. Vladimir's envoys stood inside gigantic sundial, oriented to the winter solstice, between columns from the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, above mosaic swastikas and the omphalion, the navel of the earth. And they said, "This is heaven." They mistook pagan optics for a divine miracle, and on the basis of that mistake, Rus became Orthodox. Or, not a mistake. Perhaps the envoys felt precisely what they were supposed to feel. Not the Christian God, not the Orthodox liturgy, but the power of the place. The same power the Greeks felt when they erected the altar of Apollo on this hill. The same one Halfdan felt when he carved runes into the marble. The same one Mehmed felt when he ordered the building preserved instead of demolished. Hagia Sophia does not persuade with words. It acts directly, through light, through stone, through proportion. Through what Anthemius and Isidore stitched into its walls 1,500 years ago. A pagan formula that works on anyone who enters. Vladimir was baptized in 988. He baptized Kiev. He baptized Rus. And from that moment, Constantinople became the gravitational center of Russian civilization. Not Rome, not Jerusalem, Constantinople, the city with Hagia Sophia, the city where the navel of the earth lies in the floor. And when Constantinople fell in 1453, the idea did not fall with it. It relocated to Moscow. Moscow is the third Rome, and there shall be no fourth. A formula attributed to the monk Philotheus of Pskov, 16th century. The first Rome fell. The second Rome, Constantinople, fell. The third, Moscow, stands and will stand forever. This is not a religious formula, it is an imperial one. It speaks not of faith, it speaks of power. Whoever inherits Rome inherits the world. Whoever inherits Constantinople inherits Hagia Sophia. Whoever inherits Hagia Sophia stands on the navel of the earth. That one is the center. The Russians understood this. Ivan III married Sophia Palaeologina, niece of the last Byzantine emperor. He brought the double-headed eagle to Moscow, the coat of arms of Byzantium. He declared himself heir to Constantinople. The Kremlin was rebuilt by Italian architects as a new Constantinople. The Dormition Cathedral as a new Hagia Sophia. Moscow was trying on the role of the Second Rome, and trying it on precisely, stone by stone, symbol by symbol, column by column. This relates to a line that stretches unbroken. Apollo on the acropolis of Byzantium. Constantius, a temple on the same site. Justinian, dome, columns, solstice. Olga, baptism. Vladimir, the choice of faith. Philotheus, Third Rome. Ivan III, the double-headed eagle. Each link, one building. Hagia Sophia. Not a book, not an idea, not a dogma. A building. A physical object of marble, porphyry and gold that for 1,500 years determined who considered themselves the center of the world. Look at the list. Constantius II stamped his seal. Justinian stamped his seal. The Crusaders stamped their seal. Mehmed stamped his seal. Ataturk stamped his seal. Erdoğan stamped his seal. 6 seals, 6 owners. Each entered the building and declared it his own. Did not dedicate it to God, claimed it for himself. Each changed the name. Each changed the rite. Each placed his symbol, cross, crescent, star, flag, and each believed he was the last. But the building belongs to none of them, because the building is not a temple. The building is a seal, an imperial seal, an instrument of legitimation. Whoever possesses Hagia Sophia declares himself the center of the world, not because God decided so, but because the omphalion lies in the floor, because the axis points to the solstice, because the columns come from the temples of the 7 wonders, because everyone who has entered beneath this dome felt what Vladimir's envoys felt. We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth, and whoever controls that feeling controls an empire. Hagia Sophia was not built for God, it was built for an emperor. It is dedicated to wisdom, not divine but philosophical. Sophia is not a prayer, it is knowledge. Power through knowledge. Pagan knowledge. Astronomical. Optical. Geometric. Knowledge stitched into the walls by Archimedes, by Ptolemy, by Heron. Knowledge embodied in stone by the columns of Artemis, by the porphyry of Heliopolis, by the marble of Baalbek. Whoever possesses the building possesses this knowledge, and whoever possesses the knowledge possesses the world. Dandelo's tomb is still in the wall, empty. The bones were removed long ago, but the marble slab remains in place. The man who plundered the building is walled into it forever. The building does not take revenge, it absorbs, takes into itself everyone who tried to own it. Constantius, forgotten, but his foundation stands. Justinian, forgotten, but his columns stand. The Crusaders, forgotten, but their leader is in the walls. Mehmed, forgotten, but his mihrab is in place. Each owner dissolved into the building dissolved into none of its owners. 6 times the sign was changed. 4 times the walls were repainted. 3 times the dome collapsed, twice burned to the ground. Once stripped to bare walls, covered with carpets, drawn behind curtains, hung with calligraphy, fitted with minarets. Crosses removed, crosses restored, removed again. 1,500 years of continuous substitution, layer upon layer, name upon name, owner upon owner. But the columns of Artemis stand. 8 green pillars from a temple worshipped 1,000 years before Christ stand. Carrying the semi-domes, carrying the entire building. 8 red porphyry pillars from Heliopolis stand. The pagan altar in the narthex stands. The omphalion in the floor lies in place. The swastikas in the mosaic lie in place. The axis of the building gazes towards sunrise on the 21st of December. The foundation stands on a pagan acropolis 2,600 years old. Halfdan's runes on the marble. Russian graffiti on the walls. The weeping column wet. None of this has changed. In 1,500 years, under 6 owners, under 4 religions, under 3 domes. Everything on top changed. Dome, mosaics, plaster, curtains. Nothing changed below. Foundation, columns, axis, floor. The top, human. The bottom, pagan. The top, temporary. The bottom, eternal. Hagia Sophia waits. It has waited 1,500 years. It waited for Constantine and accepted his foundation. Waited for Justinian and accepted his columns. Waited for the Crusaders and absorbed their leader. Waited for Mehmed and accepted his plaster. Waited for Ataturk and showed him the Omphalion. Waited for Erdoğan and allowed him to draw the curtains. Accepted each one, belonged to none. Gave each one the feeling we knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth, and outlived each one. The building awaits its next owner, the next name, the next dome, the next layer. It will wait a while longer. It is accustomed to waiting. It has eternity ahead, and we, only questions. The same ones with which we began. What was it built for? Who does it belong to? And why, after everything we have learned, does not a single guidebook in the world tell the truth? Because the truth is inconvenient. For everyone. For Christians, because their chief temple stands on pagan bones. For Muslims, because their chief mosque faces not Mecca but the sun. For scholars, because beneath the foundation lies a layer that is forbidden to excavate. For the state, because €25 per admission ticket yields more revenue than answers to uncomfortable questions. Everyone profits from Hagia Sophia remaining a mystery. Mystery sells. The answer is dangerous. But the building is not a mystery. The building is an answer. You only need to look down. Subscribe to the channel if you want to know what no guidebook will tell you. Hit the bell so you do not miss it. Share with those who are tired of taking things on faith. The next building whose mask we strip away will surprise you. You have just learned what appears in no guidebook in the world, in no school textbook, on no official Hagia Sophia website. Pagan columns inside a Christian temple, a cathedral-sized sundial, the navel of the earth in the floor of a mosque, 6th century swastikas under a carpet, Viking runes on the patriarch's balcony, a prostitute on the patriarch's throne, a dome that collapsed 3 times, and a building that has outlived them all and waits for the next. If, after this video, you can never look at famous buildings the same way again, then we have done our job. Hit like right now. Do not put it off. One click and the algorithm shows this video to others who are also tired of taking things on faith. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already. We strip the masks off the most famous buildings, events, and figures in history. Every video, what the textbooks keep silent. Every one, facts, dates, names. No fairy tales, no softening, no permission asked. Tap the bell and select all notifications. Without the bell, YouTube decides for you what to watch. With the bell, you decide. Write in the comments, which building should we take apart next? The Colosseum? Notre Dame? The Taj Mahal? The pyramids? Each of them has its own lie. And we will find it. Share this video. Send the link to someone who loves history. Someone who asks questions. Someone who is not afraid of uncomfortable answers. One link, and one more person stops seeing the world through a guidebook. The archive of inconvenient facts. We do not tell stories. We strip them to the bone. Until the next video.